Ian, would you like to introduce yourself as well and let us go ahead and get started? So we'll give Ian just a second and then we'll get started here.
Hi, everyone. This is Ian with the Prometheus Radio Project. We have about 122 people on the call, and we're just about to get started. So we're excited to talk to you very shortly.
Okay, so let's get started. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have a big crowd. My name is Brandy Doyle. I'm the Policy Director at the Prometheus Radio Project. This is a webinar to help folks figure out how to apply for community radio station. And we're so excited that so many people have joined us. If you're listening but you are not looking at anything and you want to participate in the webinar online, you need to go to indiemeeting.com/Prometheus Radio 1. That's the next one. And we're going to go ahead and get started at this time. Ian, can you give me the next slide? Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the goals and agenda for today's meeting. The goal for this webinar is to familiarize people with the FCC Form 318. That's the form that you'll have to apply for community radio station. Now, there's a lot of people on the call, and some of you may not be ready to learn how to apply. You may be more thinking, I want to know what a community radio station is. I want to know how to run a station. I want to learn more about the value of community radio. It has resources on all of that, but that's not the focus of this particular webinar. You can watch some past webinars that are archived at prometheusradio.org/archives. And that's a place that you can go to watch a webinar on more general topics about community radio. This particular webinar is focused on how to apply for station with the FCC process. Okay, so a couple of people told me that it sounds like I'm breaking out underwater. I will. I can let Ian speak for a minute. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, I'll keep going. So the goals for this webinar are to familiarize people with FCC Form 318. We're going to go over the basics of the process for applying for a station, the timeline ahead, and who's eligible. And we are going to talk about how to log into the FCC website, how to get a login, what you need to access the form. We're going to go through the form itself. We're not going to go through every single detail, but we're going to give you we want people to feel familiar with the form and comfortable navigating it on your own by the end of this webinar. We're going to talk about how to get support from Prometheus, and then throughout we'll be answering your questions, and we'll have some time at the end as well. So welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you. That's our thing for today. Next slide, please. All right. Who's eligible for low-power community radio stations? Stations are available to nonprofit organizations, schools, local government agencies, public safety agencies, and tribes. If you're fall into one of those categories, you're eligible to apply for a low-power station. The way you apply is on the FCC website. It's an online-only process through something called the Consolidated Media Database System, or CDBS. CDBS is the FCC database that you'll use to file your application. These applications due October 15th to 29th, and that's called the application filing window. And all the applications, no matter when you start them, are due during that period. And there's no advantage to applying at the beginning of that period or at the end. Anytime during that, window is when you want to apply. How do you get your application granted? Which ones will get granted? The FCC, if your application is accurate and it's complete, and there's nothing wrong with it, and there's nobody else competing for your frequency where you're applying, the FCC will grant your application. Now, that'll be the case in rural areas where there's not a lot of competition. In other areas where there are competitors, the FCC grants the application to the group that has the most points. And we'll talk later in this webinar about how to get those points, what you get the points for. The basic system is you need to have an application that's accurate, that's complete, that has as many points as you can. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. I also wanted to, we have a quick question here. Is there any way to see if anyone's competing in your area? Not at the time of application. So you can pretty much assume that you will have competitors in most urban areas, in most cities. You can also apply for only one LPFM station. You don't need a 501c3 status from the IRS, but you do need to be a nonprofit registered with your state. You can also download the FCC Form 318 PDF at fcc.gov/forms. And you can't file that PDF. You're going to have to use the online system, but that's available for you so that you can go through it, look at the instructions, and get prepared. All right. I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so we'll hang out for 1 minute. So the other point I want to let people know is that in order to be eligible for station, you will need to have an available frequency in your area, an open frequency on your radio dial, and you may need to hire an engineer to help you with that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that process later in the webinar. All right, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so I think there's a technical problem. Moving to the next slide, I'm going to answer a couple of questions from chat while we're waiting for that. So one question, can a nonprofit sponsor a station? If you're working with a nonprofit organization and your group is a project of that nonprofit organization, that's fine. The important thing to note is that the board of directors of that nonprofit is the official licensee of your station. They're the ones that control the station. They have ownership over it, and they're the ones responsible to the FCC. We'll answer a couple more questions at this stage. Let's see. Someone asks, are you sure that the nonprofit status is state only? There is a difference. Yes, there is a difference between state nonprofit status and what it means to be a 501c3 with the federal government. And yes, it's the state government that's important. The 501c3 tax status is not what you need to apply. If you're registered with your state, those documents with your state, it's usually going to be articles of incorporation. That's what you need. Question, is the form available now? Yes, it's available now. It's at the link is at the bottom of this slide. And you can go ahead and pull out the PDF, download the PDF for your own use. But when you actually file, you'll be filing through the online CDVS system, which we will show you how to do. Another question, what's the deal with waivers that are required? We'll talk a little bit about that. The waivers, in places where there's a lot of competition for stations, the FCC require you to have a waiver that of the ordinary rules about how far apart your station can be from other stations, and those waivers will allow you to be a little bit closer to other stations and fit in urban areas. And those waivers are something that you may be able to do with free software that Prometheus provides, or you may need to hire an engineer to help with that process. So we can talk, we'll talk a little bit later in the webinar about how you get those waivers. Another question, are churches eligible? Yes, churches are eligible. They're, if they're registered as nonprofits, which most churches are. There's a question about BMI and ASCAP fees. Those are fees that stations pay to these companies to pay for the music that they play. There's someone who's on the line who's not muted. We're hearing some audio static. Great, okay. All right, so it looks like we have the next slide up. I'm going to hand it off to Ian from Prometheus, who's going to talk about create your CDBS login with the FCC, and then we'll go back to some more questions as we continue the webinar. Ian, are you ready to talk?
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties for people coming on late. I am Ian. So we're going to talk very briefly about how to log into the CDBS, which is the FCC's database where you apply for a station. So welcome to the consolidated database system. So that PDF that some of you have seen with the application instructions and a copy of the application, that's a really good tool, but that is not how you're going to apply. To apply, you must apply online. You can't mail in your application. And to apply online, you must create an account on the FCC's database. So if you're looking at our slideshow, you see a very long URL. You can use that, or you can use this abbreviated URL we have created, prometheusradio.org/CDBS, and that will bring you directly to the CDBS login page where you can create an account. So here it's pretty straightforward. To create an account, just click Create New Account. So this is what it's going to look like. The legal name of applicant is the name of your organization, not your name. Remember, these licenses are only available to nonprofit organizations, not individuals. So remember, legal name of applicant is the name of your group. And everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Once you create your account, it's going to give you a CDBS account ID. Don't lose this ID. Write down your ID with your password. Okay, and then we'll bring you to a list of forms. The form we're looking for is Form 318. That is the magic number. That is the form for the low-power FM application. So there's a pre-form you have to fill out before you start getting to your LPFM application. In the pre-form, the first field that you'll see at the top is a description, form description. That is for your own use, so that can be whatever you want. It's just to remind you when you log in what you're working on. Below that, the only other thing you have to fill out is pre-form question 1, and that is new station. That's what you're applying for, and then you can hit enter, and that will bring you to your application. So you'll see this lays out the different sections of the application, and now I'm going to Brandy to talk about section 1 and 2.
All right, so section 1, general information. Most of these fields will actually auto-populate. The FCC will fill them out automatically based on the earlier information that you entered. You're going to leave your call sign blank. The facility identifier number the FCC will fill in for you. FCC registration number, if you can see that field, that's a number that you need to get assigned. And if you go see at the bottom, it says edit FRN. That's the FCC registration number. When you go there, the FCC will take you through a process to get that number. And you're going to need your taxpayer ID number or employer ID number. Most nonprofits will have this. If you don't, there's an option for that as well. But your organization most likely has one of these numbers, and that you'll use that to get the FRN. And there's some instructions when you click on that the FCC will take you through. You'll click on news station. Be sure to enter your email address. It's an option, but we certainly encourage you to fill it in because that way the FCC can reach you with questions about your application. All right, next slide, please. Section 2 is the legal section. This is where it starts to get a little more complicated. The first question is just certifying that everything is true. The second question about eligibility. This question is it's like an either/or question. You're certifying you're either a nonprofit educational organization, not any nonprofit or any school or college or university, or you're eligible because you're a tribal organization, or you're eligible because you're a state or local government. Now, for question 2A, this is where you're most likely it's going to be your first exhibit. Now, exhibits are things that you submit to the FCC to prove or back up the statements that you make. You can see there's a button here for Exhibit 2, and you must include an exhibit. If you don't, your application will get dismissed. So it's very important to include an exhibit where required. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like when you go to include an exhibit. You can add an attachment, a document that you upload. You can also fill in the text of the box. Next slide, please. And this is the exhibit that you'll be filling in. So if you're assuming that you are an organization, which most folks on this call, that's how they'll be applying, you're going to tell the FCC the educational purpose of your organization, how your programming is going to advance that purpose, descriptions of your programming, and if possible, program schedules, and documents establishing your nonprofit status, such as your articles of corporation. So let me take a minute with this here. The FCC is not going to judge your application on the basis of how good your educational purpose is, whether it's better or worse than another organization's, how good your proposed programming is. They don't get into decisions about content. They're barred from doing so by the First Amendment. So the FCC is really just looking here to make sure that you have one, so you should be accurate to the best of your knowledge to what your plan for your programming is. And education can be broad. If you're going to have a blues station, your purpose can be, we're going to educate the community about blues music, and our proposed programming is going to do that because we're going to have the best local blues musicians and interviews with blues musicians, and your educational purpose can be thought of in a very broad way. You want to have give details you can and include documents that establish your nonprofit status, and this is going to be important for several parts of your application. And this is whatever you filed with the state that you live in. Okay. The parties to your application, in most cases, are the members of your board of directors. These are the people that own and control your station. These folks are the people that you're going to need to list on your application, and one by one you'll put in their name and address. You'll put in their citizenship status, so if they're a U.S. citizen, the positional interest, and this is something that's specific to your organization and your bylaws in your state. So most often a member of a board of directors is called a director. You may have another title, an officer, some other title. Percentage of votes, again, this is specific to your organization and your board, and percentage of total assets. Generally with a nonprofit, the assets are not divided among the board members, so you would just put 0 for each board member. But that's going to be specific to your state and your bylaws and your organization. So you can check in if you don't know those things with someone with your organization who does. Somebody asked about, so not zero for positional, positional interest. Somebody asked zero for percentage of total assets. So positional interest is the title of that person. So these are all the people that have control over your station. And those typically are your board members. And somebody asked a question about how many people need to be on the board, and again, that's specific to your state. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just a sample of somebody filling it in. You'll just do it one at a time, and then keep adding board members until you've added them all. Okay, this is the next section of the goal part of the application. Questions are on the community-based criteria and ownership criteria. The community-based criteria is another select one option. You don't have to select all of these, you just have to pick one. So either your organization is physically headquartered within 10 miles of where you're putting the station, and that can be 20 miles if you're in a rural area, meaning outside the top 50 markets. Or your organization has 75% of your board members within those same distances. So it's either your headquarters or 75% of your board members have to be local. This is how the FCC defines local. And then there's a separate criteria if you're a tribe, broadcasting on tribal lands, or if you're a public safety organization. Now, in general, you have a headquarters for your organization. We recommend that you select that option because it's more secure, your members can move around. So if you have a headquarters, that's the easiest one to prove. If not, then you can certainly use the homes of your board members. On the ownership question, these are mostly questions related to making sure that your organization doesn't own other broadcast licenses, whether the members of your board, their family members. There's rules, at the FCC against owning a low-power station as well as other radio stations. So there's not going to go into all the details about the ownership rules and their exceptions, but you can read them at prometheusradio.org/checklist, or you can read them in the FCC's own Form 318 instructions. But in most cases, if nobody on your board or involved in your organization owns any other broadcast licenses, then you're fine on this question. Next slide, please. All right. The next three questions are all about character issues. Character issues, you'll be asked if you had unresolved character issues in other broadcast proceedings, which won't be the case for most people with low-power radio, since most people have never been involved in broadcasting before. You'll be asked if anyone on your board has had an adverse finding in court with around some specific issues, and those are felonies, mass media relating antitrust or unfair competition, fraudulent statements to the government, or discrimination. If you have any of these on your board, if there is a person on your board who's been guilty of a felony, you have to report that to the FCC. It doesn't automatically disqualify your application, but you do have to report, and if that's the case, I would recommend talking to an attorney or the FCC further about how that situation will work. You must swear on testimony that none of your application, that's your board member, has been involved in unlicensed radio, pirate radio. That doesn't mean that you can't have a volunteer at some point, who has been involved, but the parties to your application, the people who control your station, may not have been involved in unlicensed radio. And finally, if any of the parties to your application have drug convictions that subjected them to the denial of federal benefits. And most people with those convictions will know whether or not they've been denied federal benefits, and if not, then you can to an attorney about that. So these are all character issues that affect your application. Pretty simple and straightforward. We'll now move to Part 3 of the application, which is the point system. About who wins in the competition, and I'll hand it off to Ian to discuss that.
Hi, everyone. So there's been a lot of questions in the chat about additional points in regards to the things Brandy was mentioning. Everything set up to this point has mainly been requirements. These are things you have to do to be able to apply for a low-power FM license. The things we're going to talk about now are the bonus points you can get. So you actually do not need to get any of these points, and you can still win a license. However, in most cases, especially in urban areas, you're going to want to get as many of these bonus points as possible. So here are the 6 possible points you can get. No other places in your application can you get additional points. It's only in Section 3 where you demonstrate which points you're going to receive. So the first one is 2 years of an established community presence. And what that means is that your organization can demonstrate that you've been in the area where you're going to broadcast, so that's 10 miles in the top 50 markets or 20 miles outside the top 50 markets, that you have been there for 2 years, and you can demonstrate that by submitting an exhibit. We'll talk about that in the next slide. That's the first point. Second point is if you pledge, you're making a promise to the FCC that you can do 8 hours of locally originated programming. So this is programming that is done locally, and that can include, music selected and played by a disc jockey, call-in shows, broadcasts of local events, musical performance, anything like that. It doesn't include automated or repetitive programs. The third point you can get is if you pledge, again, you make a promise to the FCC that you will have a publicly accessible studio. So what is under this point includes a publicly accessible studio that is reachable by telephone and is staffed 20 hours a week and is located in the area where you're going to be broadcasting. So at this point, you also must include the proposed address and telephone number of that studio. The fourth point we call the peanut butter and jelly point, and the FCC calls it this because just like peanut butter and jelly, these things are better together than alone. So you get a bonus point if you can pledge the 8 hours of local programming and the publicly accessible studio. If you pledge both of those, you get an additional point. The fifth point most groups are going to get, this is the point for new applicants. So anybody who does not already own a low-power FM station would get this point. The only groups that this really is relevant to are tribal organizations who can own up to 2 stations and universities in some situations. And the sixth point is for tribal groups who are broadcasting on tribal land. And so I'll go to the next slide really quick before I take questions. So this slide is just showing Section 3, the point system. You can see it's mostly yes or no answers for question 1. For bonus point 1, the established community presence, you need to submit an exhibit, like I said. And this exhibit should prove that your nonprofit has been local for the last 2 years. So before I move on to the next section, actually, let's take a few questions.
I can grab one question, Ian. There's a question about how tribe is defined by the FCC. So I'll grab that one. Tribe is any Indian or Alaska Native tribe, band, nation, pueblo, village, or community recognized by the federal government. And a tribal organization is a private nonprofit entity that is 51% or more controlled by a tribe or tribe. So this relies on the federal definition of tribe, but a tribal organization can be a nonprofit that is controlled by a tribe.
Okay, somebody is asking if the studio doesn't have a phone number yet, would you still get a point for number 3? As far as we know, you need to include the studio address and phone number. So you should plan on being able to put a phone number for that actual studio. Okay, and we get another question. What kind of exhibit would demonstrate that a nonprofit is local? So this is a good question. So this exhibit would be almost identical, or if not identical, to the documentation we were talking about before, proving that you're a nonprofit. So like Brandy discussed earlier, in the requirements section, you have to attach documents like your corporate charter or articles of incorporation to prove you're a nonprofit. If the date is on that demonstrates that you have been around for more than 2 years, you can use that exhibit, that documentation, for this bonus point. Any other questions before we move on?
I'll grab one. Somebody asked, can you create a nonprofit organization specifically for a radio station? Absolutely, you can do that. But because of the point awarded to groups that have been in existence for 2 years, you may lose out in a competition to someone who's been around for longer. So if you can work with an existing nonprofit around your radio application, then that group, who's been around for 2 or more years, you'll have a bonus. But certainly you can start your own nonprofit organization.
Okay, so just before we move on, just remind people those bonus points, again, don't make you ineligible if you can't meet those. Those are just bonus points. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to check off all of those. Okay, so section 4 and 5, these are very easy and straightforward. Most of it is self-explanatory. In question 1 here, established community presence, you're just going to put the date in which you have commenced being an organization. This is only going to come into play in very rare circumstances where there is unresolved competition. And then you see in section 5 is just a certification certifying that the person who's filling out this application agrees with everything that's in it. Okay, so section 6, the tech box. So there's going to be another webinar later this month that you can find on Prometheus's website, and you can register for it. That webinar is going to go over everything you need to know in terms of finding the perfect place for your radio station and where to put it on the dial. So we're going to talk much more in depth about that later in this month. I'm going to walk you through that, but I'll mention a few things here. So basically what this section, you need to know for this section is actually where is your station going to be and where is it going to be on the dial. So where is it going to be in your town or city, and where is it going to be on the dial? And in many other cases, especially in urban areas, you're also going to have to prove that you're not going to be causing interference with other stations. The biggest tool to help you through this section is R-Free. This is software that Prometheus has created, and if you use that software, it will pump out a lot of the numbers that you need to fill out this text box. You can go to rfree.radiospark.org to use that software, and you should feel free to call Prometheus up or get in touch with an engineer if you need more help. Okay, so I guess before we go into resources, we take a few more questions. So here's a question on points. If we know of 5 other groups who also want to apply, can we pull points together? So not exactly. You can only get the maximum number of points that you have, and that is how the FCC decides which group is awarded the license. There are After that happens, there are other opportunities for groups to collaborate and form timeshare agreements with each other to create settlements.
I'll grab one. Someone asked if public access television stations are eligible. Yes, they are. Public access television station is not an FCC license holder in most cases. That those stations, there are a number of them that already have listener stations, and it can be a great collaboration. Another question we got a little bit earlier was about, can you explain the 8-hour local programming point? So I can explain that. So this is a pledge. If you pledge that you're going to originate at least 8 hours a day of local programming on your station, you get a point. And local programming means programming that you originate at your station, but it doesn't have to be live. It can be recorded in advance. And it could be a local DJ who is selecting music and, speaking in between songs. It doesn't have to be all local songs. It doesn't have to be only, news, though news would qualify, but it could be music programming with a local DJ at your studio who's creating that program. And so that 8 hours a day is intended to really give a preference to groups with a genuine local presence that are providing local content for their community. Someone also asked, if someone's denied, will there be a chance to reapply, or is this a one-shot deal? It's possible that you can apply the next time the FCC opens the low-power filing window, but we don't know when that will be. The last power filing window was 13 years ago, back in 2000. So because of that, we think of this kind of as a one-shot deal. We don't really know when the next opportunity is going to come, so it's really important for folks to be prepared for October. Again, go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, here's another good question. Somebody asked, can you change your studio address, phone number after filing the application? The answer is yes. In fact, you must amend your application and change your application if things change throughout the process. So if anything that you put in your application changes between now and ever, you want to log back in and correct it. Some people are asking about R free. So that is R, the letter R, free, F-R-E-E.
.3, or if you want to be 97.3, but there's enough station at 97.5, that's close. So you have to be 3 or more clicks away on the video dial from another station. You can be a little bit closer with a special waiver, and this is going to be covered in the technical webinar that we'll be doing later on. But it's not so much about miles, it's about how far you are in the dial. And then in terms of the real-world terrain, it's about whether your station is going to cause interference to another station. So it could be closer if there's, if you can prove that your station is going to cause interference. And that can be handled by the kind of antenna you have and how high it is, and maybe there's a hill or a mountain between you and the station. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. It's not just a set mile distance. Another question about can you convert a low power station to a regular full power FM station? There's no process for converting a station. It's certainly possible that your organization could apply for a full power station later on in its lifetime, and you could switch and do that. And we have a number of low power station friends who've been able to do that in past opportunities, but there's not really a conversion process with one license or another.
So there seems to be a bit of confusion going on in the chat. around the rules, I would encourage people to go to prometheusradio.org/checklist to get very clear answers to the rules around eligibility. That's prometheusradio.org/checklist.
One question, is there a minimum budget for nonprofit to qualify or a minimum number of employees? No, there are no budgetary or employee requirements. Another question is, if you're going through the application process and you change your mind, at what point can you stop the process? My understanding is at any time. You just want to let the FCC know that you're withdrawing your application.
Some folks have questions about our scholarship program, Station Torchbearer Scholarship Program. So I'll explain very briefly. This is a program that for groups who need closer support in applying for these licenses. It includes bi-weekly phone calls where we check in on your progress, preliminary engineering advice and support, and consultation around other tricky things in the application. To apply for this, again, you just go to prometheusradio.org/applicant support. And there's scholarships available for that. And you also have the option just to buy into the program at $2,000 if you're not awarded a scholarship. So if you're interested in that, please get in touch with us.
A couple of people have asked if you can have a repeater to extend your signal, to boost your signal. Actually, so these are called FM translators. They're, translators can repeat the signal of a bigger station. And for the first time, low power stations are in fact allowed to have translators. You can have up to 2. This is a new rule change recently for low power radio. But you still have to get them, and there's not a window opening right now for for translators. So you could purchase one from another station, but at this time there's not a window. It is permitted, however, which is great. This is a new. There's a couple people on chat who may not have known it, but it's a new rule for low power radio. Someone asks, are existing community radio stations eligible? Certainly you can apply, but because you can only own, low power radio is one per customer, you can only own one broadcast license. If you got the low power station, you would have to give up your other license. So if for some reason you would prefer to have a low power license, it's in a better location or works better for your community, you're welcome to apply. But if it's granted, then you would need to turn in your earlier license. Low power is all about spreading diversity, localism, and so the rules for low power is it's one per organization. There's a slight variation on that for tribal entities, and for universities that might have a university station and then a separate student station. Somebody asks, when can you start fundraising? You can start fundraising right away. We encourage folks to really start planning not just the application process, but thinking about what kind of station you want, getting your community involved, and fundraising is one way to do that. One idea that we have for people is if you're going to start fundraising now, you might want to come up with a plan of how you'll use those funds if you don't get the license. Are you going to give them back to everyone? Are you going to donate them to another community media project in your area? It's helpful so that, if you're asking people for money for a project that may or may not happen, to be able to tell them, this is going to our low power station. If we don't get it, it's going to our internet radio station, or we're going to donate it to another project, or we're going to return it to you. But you can start fundraising at any time. One person asks, there's another LPFM station in their town. Is there conflict for starting a new station? I think it really depends. I think that, in a community that already has a community radio station, you don't want to cause, there's certainly no FCC rule against it. And if you want to make sure that there's, plenty of support for both stations to thrive, you might want to look at, what needs aren't being met by that other station. Instead of copying their programming exactly or doing the same type of programming to reach the same type of audience, you might want to think about, we could do Spanish language programming. That community is not getting any community radio. We could do, if it's mostly music, we could do news. There's a way to think about how your station can meet different needs than other community radio stations in your town so that there's room for everyone.
Here's a question about fundraising other than grassroots fundraising, specifically underwriting. Yes, so underwriting is allowed in low power radio. So again, this is not advertising. This is NPR style advertising underwriting. You really can't get underwriters until you have the station, but a lot of groups have agreements before they start their station with packages for underwriting with local businesses to help them get funds before they go on air. So that's an idea. But grassroots fundraising really is the big one in terms of building up an early listenership and resources.
One person says, we're applying for 3 stations in our area. If they're spaced far enough apart, can they be on the same frequency? It is possible for 3 low power stations to be licensed on the same frequency in the same area. However, one organization can't apply for 3. So you may have 3 different groups that are applying for 3 different stations, and you'll have a network of friends that are all working together or all doing different projects for community radio, but one organization can only apply for 1 station.
Okay, so I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Okay, so there's a lot of other unanswered questions on this webinar. We'll definitely pool these answers and get definitive answers because there's a lot of back and forth on the webinar, some of which may not be accurate. And I also encourage people, again, to go to prometheusradio.org/checklist for definitive answers on eligibility.
Yeah, and I'd like to reiterate for people, maybe you could even take it back to the last slide, Ian, so that folks can be reminded of how to fill out an applicant profile. The best way to get support from Prometheus is by filling out a group profile. That's where you're going to get that newsletter. It's where you're going to be able to access our telephone help desk. And so if you have specific questions that we haven't gotten to and we haven't had time for, you can always give us a call at our help desk if you're in our database system. And so we really encourage everyone to fill out that profile. We'll also be sending updates about any other news we get from the FCC and any future webinars. If we haven't gotten to your question today, we apologize. We know that there are a lot more questions that we can answer. Some of them we'll have to check on and get back to you. Some of them we just don't have time to get to. But we really appreciate everybody joining us, and we hope that you will sign up for more support, that you'll donate if you can donate and help us provide the support for free ongoing in the future. And thank you so much. We hope that everybody out there gets to work and starts some amazing radio stations, and we'll be here to support you to do it. And I guess we'll wrap with that. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Stay in touch.